So who here has ever been the lucky person to get to experience Austin traffic? Right? So Wednesday at Bible study, we had what I would think is a fairly robust conversation about traffic. And on my way home, it dawned on me that we can actually learn a lot about ourselves sitting in traffic. We can learn of our impatience. We can learn of our pride. Waiting in patience shows us our waiting in traffic shows us our impatience. It shows us our pride. And sometimes we feel like our time and our schedules are more important than everyone else. Sometimes when we see the traffic and we see people weaving in and out of traffic, people are honking. Oftentimes I have found myself being one of those people weaving in and out of traffic. Why? I've got to get to work, I've got to get to church, Jordan's waiting for dinner, we've got things we've got to do. Sometimes practicing humility in traffic is probably going to be a little hard, especially when all the other cars around you seem to be in just as big of a hurry, if not more than you. In our first readings today, we hear these words: "My child, conduct your affairs with humility, and you will be loved more than the giver of gifts." Notice that Sirach isn't telling us to be impressive and people will love you. He's not saying boast and show everybody what you've got and people will love you. No, Sirach is telling us to be humble. Then he continues, seek not what is too sublime for you, and search not for things that are beyond your strength. For me, that's another way that it was trying to tell me, I need to remember and recognize that I'm not in control of everything. That's tough. That's tough because we live in a day and age and a culture where we have to do more, where we're asked to prove more, where people around us, they want more and more and more. Sometimes life will have a funny way of humbling us. Sometimes our body are going to just simply say, we can't do this anymore. I don't have the answers to everything. Sometimes our health and our circumstances remind us that we are not in charge. Yes, these moments may sting just a little bit, but they can also be moments that we can learn. What can we learn from this? Grace. They remind us to let go of God, let go and let God. Let God take control of things. Lean on God. Trust in God. Today, when I read the second reading today, I was taken back to when I was a little kid, sitting in the pews with my grandmother. And when the priest would hold up the Eucharist, during the Eucharistic prayer, my grandmother would be there crying. And I asked her at the time, and she said, "Oh, Stephen, this is the point in the Mass when heaven and earth are together, and I'm there with my mom and my sisters. Stephen, this is the most..." I didn't understand what she was talking about at the time. Today, the second reading made that clear for me exactly what she was talking about. First, we have the writer of Hebrews paints a picture for us of two separate different kinds of God, two separate loves that people have for God. One is where people are scared, they're afraid and trembling. But the other one is where people stood with God in love, not afraid. We don't come before God in pride. We don't come before God in fear. We come to God in humility, in gratitude. Not because of what we've done on our own, but because of what Jesus Christ did for us. Because of that sacrifice he made. Through that sacrifice, we've got a new covenant, a new relationship with God. The second reading also makes it clear to us that when we are celebrating here, we're not doing it just as people in the room. We're celebrating with everybody in heaven, all the angels and the saints. And for me, I'm reminded of all my friends that have gone before me, my aunt, all the people that my grandmother was crying about because she was with them. Those are the people that I now understand. When we're here doing Mass and I'm praying, those are the times that we're with all those people. We're not alone. In other words, don't come before God in pride. Think about that. Every time we gather here for Mass, we are participating in the same heavenly liturgy. We are not joined only with the people in this room, but with all the saints around the throne of God. And then in today's gospel, Jesus gives us this image of a banquet. He says, when you're invited, don't run up to the best seat of the house. Take the lowest place and let the host invite you to a higher place. Why? Because the only way up in God's kingdom is down. How many of us know somebody in our lives who, when they go to a party, they just, it seems like they have no sense. They'll go right up to the front of the table. I have a few people in my life like that. I've always looked at them like, what are you doing? Jesus pushes it further. Jesus is also telling us not to just invite our friends and our family who can repay us, or somebody who has something for us. Invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind. In other words, humility isn't just about thinking of ourselves less, it's about thinking of others more and doing for others more. So how do we actually live that out? The word humility, since I was young, I've always been taught, you need to be humble, but nobody's ever been told me, what does that look like, right? For me, this week, I was able to break it down into 5 letters. Humble, H-U-M-B-L-E, right? So the H in humble, for me, means that we have to be honest with who we are. Not pretending to be, bigger or better than we are, but just knowing exactly who we are. U in humble stands for understanding others. Listening. Father Jamie said something this week that made sense to me. He said, and it was just a couple words. The first step to equity is listening, or something like that. Listening. Oftentimes you want to just talk and not, listen and understand one another. Understand why somebody may be feeling this way, or understand the situation that they're in. The letter M in humble for me means meek. We've always been taught that was like, for me, like a bad word. You don't want to be meek. But meek is not weak. Meek is like having the strength that you can keep under control. The letter B is balancing how you see yourself. I've oftentimes had to struggle with feeling not good enough. And I don't think God wants us to feel like we're not good enough. I think God wants us to walk in our lives knowing that we're good enough. But I also think there's a difference in not thinking you're good enough and thinking that you're just too good. Loving, L, the letter L, is loving and kind to others, even when there's nothing in it for you. I oftentimes, when I go to work, they come and they'll buy me cookies or donuts, and I'm like, what do you want? The schedule's already done, everything's already done. What do you want? And sometimes they have to remind me, Stephen, just take the donuts, it's nothing. And it's little acts like that I'm reminded that she's not such a bad person. She didn't want that, did she? The letter E stands for empathy. Putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Imagining their struggle. Imagining their story. I think that's hard because oftentimes we get wrapped up in our own story, our own lives, our own schedules, that when somebody comes in front of us that we've got everything going on, we don't see what they're going on. We don't understand. It's hard for us to really put ourselves in that person's shoe. Oftentimes I think of the people that are on the streets. And we all sometimes want to just, try putting yourself, nobody wants to be like that. Put yourself in their shoes. That's humility in action. That's what Sirach is pointing us to in the first reading. And that's what Hebrews shows us in the heavenly assembly. That's what Jesus calls us to live at the banquet table. So maybe this week, when you're stuck in traffic, instead of honking, take a breath and be humble. Be honest, understanding, meek, balanced, loving, and empathetic. Maybe let someone merge in front of you. Maybe at work, give credit instead of seeking. At home, maybe serve people that you live with. Because in the end, the seats of honor are not reserved for the proud or the powerful. They're for the humble. And when we take the lowest seat, we'll find that Christ is already there waiting for us.